My name is Edward Kingsley, and for 60 years I was certain that God did not exist. I built my career on reason, on logic, on tearing apart the fantasies of faith. I wrote books that turned believers into skeptics, debated theologians until they had nothing left to say. I prided myself on exposing religion as nothing more than a comforting lie. And then I died. It should have been the end. I had always said that death was nothing but oblivion, that consciousness faded like a flame snuffed out by the wind. But I was wrong. I didn't slip into darkness. I didn't cease to exist. Instead, I woke up to something far worse. I was pulled into a place I never believed in, forced to see the truth I had spent my life denying. I met the one I had mocked, the one I had sworn was nothing more than human invention, and what Dario showed me shattered everything I thought I knew. Now I am back, but no one will believe me. They call me delusional, a man broken by the fear of death, but I am not afraid. I know what's coming, and so will you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I spent my entire life mocking those who believed in God. I called them delusional, naive, slaves to an ancient lie. I stood on stages in front of thousands, dismantling their faith with cold logic. I wrote books that turned believers into skeptics, debaters into humiliated opponents. I prided myself on being the voice of reason, the one who exposed the fairy tales of religion, and for 60 years I was certain, beyond any doubt, that when I died, there would be nothing. No heaven, no hell, no God, just darkness, silence, and an eternal void where I would finally cease to exist. That's what I believed. That's what I preached. And when my time came, I was ready for it, or at least I thought I was. The night before my death, I stood on stage in front of a packed auditorium. My latest book, The Death of Faith, had just been released, already a bestseller. People hung on my every word, nodding, laughing at my jokes about the absurdity of prayer, the foolishness of divine judgment. If God is real, I said, smirking, he can strike me down right now. The audience chuckled. I spread my arms. Well, I'm waiting. More laughter. I had said similar things 100 times before, but this time something felt different. There was a weight in the air, a strange, suffocating pressure that made my chest tighten. I ignored it. I was too arrogant to believe in omens. After the event, I went to a small gathering with colleagues and friends. We drank expensive wine, discussed philosophy, laughed at the superstitious masses. Someone asked me, "What if you're wrong, Ed?" I rolled my eyes, took another sip. "If I'm wrong, I suppose I'll find out when I die," I said, "but trust me, I won't be." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, an uneasy feeling crept into my mind. I felt watched. Not by cameras, not by people, but by something vast, something I couldn't explain. Nonsense, I told myself, just exhaustion. I turned over and forced myself to sleep. The next day, I had another lecture. A full auditorium, eager faces waiting to hear the great Edward Kingsley dismantle religion yet again. I launched into my speech, feeling the familiar rush of control, of power, every word perfectly placed, every argument irrefutable. Then, mid-sentence, I felt it, a crushing pain in my chest like a fist squeezing my heart. My breath hitched, my vision blurred. I stumbled, gripping the podium. The crowd murmured, my knees buckled. The microphone slipped from my fingers. I heard screams, saw blurred faces rushing toward me, and then nothing. Not darkness, not oblivion. Something worse. I expected nothingness. A quiet, dreamless void. The end. Instead, I awoke to something far worse. At first, there was only silence, heavy and absolute, as if sound itself had never existed. Then came the realization I had no body, no hands, no feet, no breath. I was conscious but weightless, floating in a space that wasn't space at all. It was darkness, but not the kind you find in a room with the lights turned off. This was a darkness that felt alive, as if it watched me, pressed against me, seeped into whatever was left of my existence. I tried to speak. Nothing. No voice, no vibration, only thought. Was this some last flicker of brain activity before oblivion? A hallucination? I had heard of near-death experiences, but this felt real, too real. Then I heard it. A voice. Not a sound, not something heard with ears, but something deeper. It spoke inside me, around me, through me. You wanted nothingness, now you have it. I would have gasped if I had lungs. The voice was immense, powerful, neither male nor female, neither cruel nor kind. It simply was. It carried the weight of eternity, as if it had spoken before time began and would speak long after the last star had burned out. "Who's there?" I tried to say, but there were no words. Only the thought, raw and exposed. A pause, then the voice again, calm, unshaken. "You already know." A chill that had nothing to do with temperature ran through me. No, this wasn't happening. I was hallucinating. My dying brain was misfiring, grasping at old fears, creating a delusion to comfort itself. But there was no comfort here, only the oppressive weight of something I had spent my entire life denying. The darkness around me began to shift. Slowly, faint shapes took form, memories, moments from my life. I saw myself as a child standing in a church beside my mother, fidgeting while she prayed. I saw myself as a teenager, scoffing at the idea of God, proudly declaring to my father that I would never believe in fairy tales. I saw myself at university, tearing apart the arguments of a young seminarian, watching his faith crumble as I dismantled everything he held sacred. I saw lecture halls filled with eager students, nodding as I spoke of the absurdity of religion, how faith was nothing more than an evolutionary crutch. I saw my books, my interviews, my debates, all the moments where I had convinced others that there was nothing beyond this life. And then I saw them, the people, those I had influenced, their lives shifted by my words. A young woman sitting alone in her apartment, staring at a bottle of pills, my book open beside her, her last hope shattered. A father who had once believed but turned away, leaving behind a family confused and lost. A child who had watched his parents cry because he no longer prayed, because he had quoted my words back to them. The consequences of my life's work stretching further and further, rippling outward like an endless tide. I wanted to look away, but I had no eyes to close. "You were so certain," the voice said. "You thought yourself wise, but wisdom does not come from the rejection of truth." I fought against it. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was hallucinating, dying, trapped in a final delusion. "No," the voice said, as if reading my thoughts. "You are not dying. You are dead." Something in me shattered. The denial, the arrogance, the certainty, it all crumbled into something small, something terrified. "Then what is this?" I pleaded. "What's happening to me?" A silence stretched out, endless, suffocating. Then, softly, the voice answered. "The beginning." The darkness was endless, no light, no sound, just an overwhelming void stretching in every direction. I felt no ground beneath me, no walls around me, yet I wasn't floating. I simply existed in this empty, suffocating space. Time had no meaning. Seconds, minutes, hours, none of it mattered. I could have been there for a moment or for eternity. I tried to move, but there was nothing to move. I tried to scream, but there was no voice to scream with. It was as if I had been stripped of everything, my body, my senses, my very identity, leaving behind only raw, naked awareness. Then the darkness shifted. It wasn't sudden or violent. It was subtle, like a change in pressure, an unseen force moving, bending reality around me. The silence deepened, heavy and crushing, as if it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. I didn't know how, but I could feel something watching me. It wasn't a presence in the way I had known before. It was something more, something vast, something incomprehensible. A cold realization crept through me. I was not alone. And then the voice returned. "You believed that death was the end, that there was nothing beyond your final breath. Tell me, Edward, does this feel like nothing? It wasn't a voice in the way I had always understood. It did not come from above or below, nor from within or without. It was everywhere and nowhere, sinking into me, resonating through whatever I had become. It wasn't threatening or angry, but it didn't need to be. It carried authority beyond anything I had ever encountered. I wanted to answer, to speak, to argue. My instinct was to debate, to demand proof, to deconstruct this experience with logic. But I had nothing. No words, no mouth, no body, only the undeniable, inescapable truth that surrounded me. I was here, and I was wrong? The darkness around me started to stir. It twisted and writhed like living shadows, forming shapes, no, not shapes, images, visions. They flickered and pulsed, each one a window into something else, something real. I saw the hospital room where my body lay, lifeless and still, surrounded by doctors and nurses. I saw my colleagues reacting to the news, some in shock, others shaking their heads as if my death was an inevitability they had long accepted. I saw my books, my lectures, my interviews, my legacy, still echoing in the world I had left behind. And then the visions changed. I saw the people I had influenced, not as admirers, not as intellectuals enlightened by my words, but as fractured souls searching for meaning in the nothingness I had given them. A woman sitting in a dark apartment, staring at a note she had written before swallowing a handful of pills. A young man at his father's grave, whispering, "I wish I could believe you're somewhere, but I know you're just gone." A child kneeling beside his bed, hesitating before finally unclasping his hands, deciding for the first time not to pray. I wanted to turn away, to shut it out, but I couldn't. The weight of it pressed down on me, forcing me to see every consequence, every ripple, every soul I had nudged toward the abyss. "You did not believe in me," the voice said, calm, unwavering. "But they believed in you." The truth of those words struck me with unbearable force. I had always prided myself on being a man of reason, a thinker, a guide for those seeking knowledge. But I had never considered what I was taking from them. I had stripped away their faith, their hope, their foundation, and replaced it with nothing. Nothing but my own arrogance. I tried to deny it, tried to find a flaw in the logic, but there was none. These were not illusions, these were the real human consequences of my life's work, laid bare before me with no room for distortion or debate. The visions faded, dissolving back into the darkness. I was left alone again, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't just empty, it was expectant. "Where am I?" asked, the thought forming like a whisper in my mind. The darkness stirred. "You are nowhere, you are in between." A chill settled over me. In between what? Heaven and hell? Life and death? I wanted to ask, but something in me knew the answer wouldn't matter. Whatever this place was, I didn't belong here. Then for the first time, I saw it. A light. Distant, small, barely more than a flicker against the overwhelming blackness. But it was there, and it was growing. It started as nothing more than a pinprick, so faint I might have missed it if I had been capable of blinking. But as I focused on it, it pulsed, expanding outward in slow, deliberate waves. It didn't illuminate the darkness, not at first, but it pushed against it, pressing back against the void with an undeniable presence. And as it expanded, I felt something shift inside me. Not just awareness, not just understanding, but something deeper. The light wasn't just an object, wasn't just a place. It was alive. And as it came closer, I realized the terrifying truth. It had been there the whole time, watching, waiting. And now I was being called forward. The light grew, expanding in all directions, consuming the darkness around me. It wasn't just brightness. It was something more, something beyond my understanding. It had weight, presence, power. It didn't just shine, it revealed. It poured into every part of me, exposing everything that I was, everything I had ever been. I had spent my life constructing an identity, carefully curating the image of Edward Kingsley, the rationalist, the intellectual, the fearless skeptic who had dedicated himself to stripping away the illusions of faith. But here, in this place, in the presence of this unfathomable light, I had no identity, no mask, no defense. There was no stage to stand on, no crowd to applaud me, no opponent to defeat. There was only me, the real me. And for the first time, I saw myself without illusion. I had thought I was ready for death. I had spoken of it with confidence, dismissed the fear that plagued others. I had believed it was nothing more than a biological shutdown, the quiet extinguishing of neurons, the slow decay of a body returning to the earth. But what I had never considered, what I had never allowed myself to even imagine, was what came after. I had spent decades insisting that there was no after, that nothing waited beyond the threshold, and now here I was, here in the undeniable presence of something greater than I had ever conceived, stripped of all my arrogance, all my certainty. Then the voice spoke again. You believed you understood the world. You built your life upon certainty, and yet here you stand, with nothing. The voice did not need to be loud to be powerful. It did not threaten, did not rage. It simply was, and that was enough. I wanted to respond, to argue, to justify myself. But how could I? Words had always been my weapon, my shield. I had used them to break others, to dismantle their beliefs, to tear down centuries of faith with well-placed logic. But here, in the presence of something that saw through me completely, words were meaningless. The light pulsed, and suddenly, I was seeing my life again. But not as I had before. This was not a sequence of memories, not a simple replay of the past. No, this was something far worse. Because now, I wasn't just watching my actions, I was feeling them. I saw myself as a young man standing in a university debate hall, speaking with the confidence of someone who had never once doubted his own intellect. I saw my opponent, a Christian student, no older than I had been, his hands gripping the podium as I tore his faith apart, point by point, until I saw the moment his confidence shattered. I had smiled that day, thinking it a victory, but now I felt what he had felt, the crushing doubt, the fear that everything he had believed, everything that had given his life meaning, was collapsing beneath him. I had been so proud of myself then, but now, standing outside of time, I saw the truth. I had stolen something from him, something I had no right to take. The scene shifted. I saw myself on stage delivering one of my many lectures. The auditorium was packed, the audience hanging on my every word. I spoke with precision, with charm, with the unshakable conviction of a man who believed he knew everything. I mocked the concept of God, dismantled the idea of an afterlife, assured them all that they were free from the shackles of religion. The crowd laughed, nodded, applauded. I had felt so powerful then, so triumphant. But now I felt what they had felt. Not enlightenment, not freedom, emptiness. A quiet, creeping despair that they had pushed to the back of their minds, refusing to acknowledge. I had told them there was nothing beyond this life, that they were alone in an indifferent universe, and in believing me, they had lost something vital. Hope. More and more moments played out before me. Each book I had written, each interview, each conversation. I saw them all, not through my own eyes, but through the eyes of those I had influenced. A man sitting alone in a dimly lit apartment, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his hand, staring at one of my books on his coffee table, his mind spiraling into hopelessness. A woman who had once prayed every night, but after reading my words, had stopped, and with that, lost the last fragile thread that had kept her from stepping off the edge of her own despair. A child who had once believed in something greater, but after hearing my teachings, decided that life was meaningless, that nothing he did mattered. I tried to turn away, to close my non-existent eyes, but there was no escape. I had to see it all, every careless word, every smug dismissal, every argument I had thought was a triumph. It was all here, laid bare before me. And for the first time in my existence, I felt true, unrelenting horror. "You believed you were a guide," the voice said, "but you led them into darkness." The weight of it crushed me. I had always thought of myself as a man of reason, a seeker of truth, but now, confronted with the full consequences of my life, I saw the truth at last. I had not enlightened, I had not freed, I had not helped. I had destroyed. The worst part was that I had never realized it. I had convinced myself that I was doing good, that I was breaking chains, opening minds. I had never once stopped to consider the responsibility that came with influence, never thought to ask myself what happened to the people who listened to me, who followed my lead. I saw them now, I felt them now, and I understood with perfect clarity that there was no debate left to be had, no argument I could make, no defense I could mount. Because I had been wrong, I wanted to collapse, to disappear, to undo it all, but I couldn't. This was not a nightmare I could wake up from. This was not a mistake I could fix with an apology. This was reality, the raw and inescapable truth. And in the presence of that truth, I was nothing. The weight of my life pressed down on me, crushing, suffocating. There was nowhere to hide, no way to escape the truth that had unraveled before me. I had built my existence on certainty, and now that certainty was gone. Everything I had mocked, everything I had dismissed, God, the soul, eternity, it was real, and I had spent my entire life fighting against it. I wanted to beg for another chance to undo the damage I had done, but deep down, I knew the truth. Some things could not be undone, some words could not be taken back. The light around me pulsed again, not harsh, not burning, but undeniable. And then, everything changed. The space around me shifted, twisted like a veil being lifted, revealing something beyond. The light bent and stretched, forming something new. Images, visions. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was the world, but not as I had left it. Cities, people, moments unfolding before me like a vast, intricate puzzle. And then I saw the truth. I was being shown the future. At first it was familiar. People laughing, walking, working, living their lives as they always had, but something was missing, something subtle yet horrifying. There was no light in their eyes, no sense of meaning, no hope, only movement, repetition, existence for the sake of existing. I saw a man sitting alone in an office, his face illuminated by the cold glow of a screen. His shoulders were hunched, his expression vacant. He had everything the modern world had promised: success, comfort, security, but there was no joy, no fulfillment. He reached for a bottle, poured himself a drink, then another and another. He wasn't celebrating, he was numbing. The vision shifted. A young woman scrolled endlessly through her phone, her face blank, her fingers moving automatically. Around her, people did the same, heads bowed, eyes glazed. No one spoke, no one connected. They lived in a world of infinite information, yet none of it filled them. I watched as she paused, staring at something on the screen. An article, a video. It was mine. A clip of me from years ago, confidently proclaiming that life had no ultimate purpose, that meaning was an illusion humans created to comfort themselves. She exhaled slowly, locked her phone, and stared at the wall. The emptiness in her eyes was unbearable. Then the vision changed again, and the world I saw was no longer familiar. The sky was dark, not with night, but with something unnatural. The cities were different. Colder, more controlled. There was no chaos, no war, but there was no life either. People moved in perfect order, following unseen rules, submitting without question. They had been promised peace, stability, progress, and they had accepted it, given up everything for it. I saw towering structures, screens broadcasting messages not of truth, but of control. I saw laws written not for justice, but for obedience. And I saw faith not lost, but erased, systematically removed, dismantled, until nothing remained but the empty shell of civilization. And then I saw the end. The world trembled. It was not fire, not war, not some external disaster that consumed it, but something else, something deeper. It was as if the very fabric of existence was unraveling, as if the foundations of reality itself were collapsing. People screamed, but there was no one to save them. They reached for something, anything to hold on to give them hope, but there was nothing. They had built their world on emptiness, and when the moment came, the emptiness swallowed them whole. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The weight of it was unbearable. This was the future. This was where it all led. You believed in nothing, the voice said, and now nothing is what they have. Terror clawed at me. No, I whispered, or thought, or screamed, whatever I was in this place, whatever I had become. No, this can't be real. This can't be the end. The end is not yet written, the voice said, but the path has been laid. The visions faded, the swirling chaos dissolving into the ever-present light. I was left standing, or floating, or simply existing, in the presence of the one who had shown me everything. I felt small. I felt broken. And yet, for the first time since my death, I felt something else. A choice. You may stay, the voice said. Remain in what you have chosen in the absence you embraced. Or you may return. Return. The word barely made sense. How could I return? I was dead. I had seen my body, had felt myself leave it, but the voice was not offering explanations, only options. If I go back, I said, what happens? You will speak. Speak? I repeated, the word foreign, uncertain. You will tell them what you have seen, what you now know to be true. I hesitated. And will they believe me? A silence stretched between us, heavy with meaning. No, the voice said, they will not. A weight pressed down on me, something deeper than fear, deeper than doubt. I saw it already. My colleagues, laughing, the world dismissing me, calling me insane, delusional, a fraud. My books would be thrown away, my reputation destroyed. I would become a joke, a cautionary tale of a brilliant man who lost his mind in the face of death. Then what is the point? I asked, the hopelessness creeping in. The voice did not answer immediately. Instead, I felt something I could not describe, something vast and endless and beyond comprehension. And then the answer came. Because truth is not for your sake, it is for theirs. The choice settled in front of me, vast and unchangeable. Stay in nothingness, in the void I had spent my life believing in, or return to a world that would never accept what I had to say. The weight of it crushed me. Either way, I would lose everything. But for the first time in my existence, I knew that my choice was not about me. I closed whatever eyes I had, or maybe just my soul, and whispered, "Send me back." And the light consumed me whole. The light swallowed me whole. There was no sensation of movement, no transition, no descent back into the world I had known. One moment, I was standing in the presence of something beyond comprehension, having seen the truth of everything I had denied. The next, I was gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had just surfaced from drowning. I was back. Fluorescent lights flickered above me, their cold, artificial glow a stark contrast to the radiance I had just left behind. My body felt foreign, heavy like a suit of flesh I had been forced back into. A beeping filled the room, steady and rhythmic. Machines, hospital monitors. The scent of antiseptic burned my nose, the stiffness of the sheets beneath me pressing into my skin. I could feel again. I was alive. A voice gasped, a woman's voice. Then another. Someone shouted for a doctor. Footsteps pounded against the floor, a rush of movement, voices rising in shock and disbelief. My vision swam, blurred figures moving around me, the sensation of hands gripping my wrist, checking my pulse. I struggled to focus, to remember where I had been only moments before, but time no longer made sense. "He's awake!" Someone's voice cracked with astonishment. He's actually awake!" More voices. More hands. The sound of something clattering to the floor, a sharp sting in my arm, a needle, an IV adjustment. I blinked hard, forcing my vision to sharpen. The faces around me were a mix of doctors and nurses, their expressions ranging from stunned to fearful, as if they had seen something impossible. Because they had. I had been dead. Not for seconds, not for minutes. I didn't know how long, but the weight of it was in their eyes. However much time had passed, I was supposed to be gone. And yet, here I was, breathing, heart beating, alive. The doctor closest to me, a man in his 50s with graying hair, leaned in cautiously. His mouth opened as if to speak, then closed, as if he couldn't form the words. Finally, he found his voice. "Mr. Kingsley, you were gone. We lost you. There was no pulse, no brain activity. He stopped himself, inhaled sharply. You were dead. I knew that. I had been beyond death. I had seen what waited on the other side. But none of them would understand. None of them could. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, as if I hadn't used it in years. When I finally forced the words out, they came hoarse, rasping. "I need to talk." The doctor frowned. "You need rest, Mr. Kingsley. You've been unconscious for—" "No," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "I need to talk. Now." I couldn't waste time. I had been sent back for a reason. The truth burned inside me, heavy and undeniable. I had to tell them. I had to tell everyone. The doctor hesitated, then glanced at the others. Uncertainty flickered between them. My reputation had preceded me. I could see it in their eyes. They knew who I was. The famous atheist, the man who had mocked faith, who had written books declaring God a fantasy. What could a man like me possibly have to say now? I tried to sit up, but my body protested, weak from whatever had happened to it. One of the nurses gently pushed me back down, her face pale. "Please, just take it slow," she murmured. But I didn't have time for slow. "I saw him," I said, forcing the words through my broken voice. "I saw God." The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that suffocated. I could feel the disbelief thick in the air, the unspoken skepticism pressing against me like an invisible force. No one moved. No one spoke. Then someone laughed. A short, disbelieving chuckle. One of the younger doctors shook his head. "You've been through a traumatic event, Mr. Kingsley. It's not uncommon for near-death experiences to feel vivid." "No," I said, shaking my head, my throat burning. "You don't understand. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't my brain shutting down. It was real." Their faces told me they didn't believe me. How could they? Just days ago, I had been the loudest voice against faith, against the idea of a divine presence. And now I was claiming to have met God, to have seen the future? I pushed against the weakness in my limbs, trying again to sit up. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from urgency. I had been sent back with a purpose, and I would not waste it. "There is something coming," I said, my voice stronger now. "Something dark. I saw it. I saw what happens when the world turns away completely." My gaze swept across them, locking onto each set of doubtful eyes. "We are heading for something terrible, and we won't see it until it's too late." No one responded. The doctor sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Mr. Kingsley, please." "I was wrong," I cut in, my voice rising. "About everything. About God, about death, about what's waiting for us." I clenched the sheets beneath my fingers, grounding myself. I spent my life convincing people that there was nothing beyond this world. I was blind, and I led others into blindness. The nurse beside me stepped back slightly, as if afraid of what I might say next. Another doctor exchanged glances with his colleague, their expressions unreadable. The doctor exhaled slowly. "You've been through something profound," he said carefully. "Perhaps it's best if we take things one step at a time." I shook my head. They weren't listening. They didn't want to listen. But that didn't change the truth. I had returned to a world that didn't want to believe. I had been given knowledge that no one wanted to hear. And yet I had to speak, because whether they believed me or not, the future was coming, and I had seen what happened when the warnings were ignored. I was given my life back, but it wasn't really mine anymore. The world around me was the same. Cold hospital rooms, skeptical faces, the distant hum of machines. But I was different. I had been sent back with knowledge that no one wanted to hear, and as I spoke, as I tried to tell them what I had seen, I watched their faces shift from shock to discomfort, from discomfort to disbelief. Then, finally, to pity. My colleagues, the very people who had once applauded my words, now looked at me like I was a broken man. The media called it a delusion, a hallucination brought on by oxygen deprivation. They invited experts to dissect my experience, to explain how the dying brain creates visions, how my mind, under the stress of death, must have conjured an illusion of God. Some of them had even read my books, quoted my own words back at me, as if to remind me of the man I used to be. "It's ironic, isn't it, Edward?" one interviewer asked, smiling in that way that wasn't really a smile. The great atheist, claiming to have seen God, almost poetic? They laughed at me, just as I had once laughed at others. My publishers severed ties. My former friends distanced themselves. Invitations to debates stopped coming. My name, once synonymous with reason and intellect, became a punchline, a warning. Don't end up like Kingsley. And yet, none of it mattered. I had been to the other side. I had seen what was waiting. I had seen what was coming. No humiliation, no mockery, no rejection could change the truth. So I spoke anyway. I told them what I had seen, that we had abandoned something vital, that we were walking blind toward a future that would consume us, that our faith, or rather our lack of it, had led us to the edge of something irreversible. Some people listened, at least for a moment. A few asked questions, some even seemed shaken, but most turned away, shaking their heads, unwilling to believe. And maybe that was always how it was going to be. I know what they say about me now, that I lost my mind, that I was so afraid of death that I invented a fantasy to comfort myself, that I betrayed everything I had stood for. Maybe, in their eyes, I did. But I was not afraid when I died. I was certain, and my certainty was shattered. Now, it no longer matters what people think of me. What matters is that I have spoken, that the truth is out there, that some part of me, no matter how small, has planted a seed. And maybe one day, when the world finally reaches the moment I saw, when the darkness comes and the emptiness is too much to bear, someone will remember my words. Maybe you will. Maybe you will remember that you were warned. And when your moment comes, when your breath slows and your body grows cold, and you find yourself standing in the place where I stood, facing the truth you spent your life ignoring, ask yourself one thing. Are you ready?